huge debate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We are thrilled to have this incredible panel here. I'm Stephen Wolf-Ferreira, the Chief Marketing Communications Officer at Quantcast. And we have, to my immediate left, Miriam Banakaram, Scott, Matt, and Rachel. Maybe you could just tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the topic of the day. So we'll start with Miriam.
The short answer is I'm a serial entrepreneur, although these days I'm an executive in residence at Columbia University.
Oh, wait, no. So we all know each other very well. We can't have any humility on this panel. She is the former CMO of Hyatt. So let's have a round of applause for Miriam.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Scott Hendrickson, SVP of Sales at News Corp. I am responsible for harvesting all of the first-party data that exists inside of News Corp for the first time to pair it with all of our custom content solutions and very premium media assets across the globe. Everyone knows News Corp. No one knows what's inside News Corp. We're the 9th largest digital publisher, and for the first time, acting like it.
Awesome.
Shameless plug, I like it.
Shameless plug, man.
It sounded ominous. Nobody knows what's inside News Corp.
Matt Tepper, Chief Strategy Officer. You guys hear me? Is my mic on?
Is this on?
Yeah, all right, good. Chief Strategy Officer, Wonderman, like probably most of all of us, trying to figure out how data connects with media, technology, and creative.
Hi, and I'm Rachel Tipograph, the founder and CEO of Micmac. At Micmac, we create commerce experiences for the social video generation and beyond. Our clients span from Procter, L'Oreal, Nestle, Bose, Levi's. We're all about getting the brand closer to the retail data and the shopper closer to that add to cart. And prior to Micmac, I ran global digital and social media at Gap.
And again, the humility factor, we're going to have to definitely quash it out because Rachel is one of the Forbes 30 under 30. And pick up your latest issue of Inc. magazine because they have the top 100 female founders, and Rachel is one of them as well. So give it up for Rachel.
Woo!
So you're not allowed to agree. We're not going to have like one of those boring panels where everyone says, yes, I like what she said. I really want to kind of have a subset conversation because this is a rare instance where you actually have all sides of the ecosystem represented. We have a marketer, we have the agency, we have a technology partner, and we have a publisher. And it's really rare to get everyone aligned because the reality is we're all here in service of the marketer. This all starts when a marketer spends $1. And Miriam, you were the CMO at Hyatt, you were the CMO at NBC Universal, CMO at Univision. You actually, I think, started your career at Y&R.
I did.
So you've seen all parts of the ecosystem. And what we're really talking about is how do you kind of put the customer first? And when you think about that brief, we're just using the brief as a vehicle to kind of showcase all the, steps that people have. It's like a bad game of telephone. But when you think about your brief, when you think about what it is that you want to accomplish, how do you kind of go about that? And how do you think about the ecosystem of partners that you have? But starting from your pain point.
Well, the first thing I would say is we're not all here in service of the marketer. We're actually all here in service of the customer. That's always been the deal. I just think that now you have more tools at your disposal to actually figure out who that customer is and try and get the right message in front of them. And it's always been about a good brief, which sometimes was the case and sometimes wasn't in terms of execution. But you now have a lot of data that you can bring to bear to get to the right person at the right time. But I still think that it really matters to have the combination of sort of art and science, right? And I think that one of the things that's happened as digital has become sort of the new norm is that people break these two things apart as if they're two distinct things. And frankly, you have to get the right message, but the right message requires creativity. So you do have to marry these things together. And in an ideal world, you bring all your partners together, but the reality is that's super complicated to do. It's a great concept. And we all aspire to it, but the reality is...
Well, why is it so hard?
Oh, well, let's move on from me.
All right, Matt, you sit at Wonderman, and Wonderman is really unique because you obviously do a lot of cool creative, but you also understand media, and then you also have a lot of data as well. You have first-party data. So what's from your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's super easy. I don't know why you're having trouble with it.
It's because I hadn't hired Wonderman. I'm pretty sure that's the answer.
Yeah,
There's your plug.
for sure, definitely. Yes.
There's your plug. It's okay.
Yeah, it's. I think it all comes, we're a people-based industry, and we don't have enough people who understand all the different components of the ecosystem. So everyone's grown up in their own lanes of subject matter expertise. and nobody knows how to integrate because there's not enough empathy for other people's jobs. Yeah, like it's super easy to say to a creative person, like, come on, how hard is it? Just like put some pictures together and some copy. And they'll turn around and they'll talk to the media people and they're like, just go buy some stuff. I don't understand why this is so hard. But when you get people who have done all of those things, you start to realize how difficult everyone's lane is, and it helps the integration piece. But there aren't enough of those people who have that context.
And then, one of the things that I'm constantly surprised at is, publishers power the internet. And, the reality is, as much as everyone, thinks of Facebook and Google and 80% of all digital ad spend is on those platforms, they are not 80% of the internet. And the reality is, that stat that you said about, News Corp, when you combine all the different brands under that umbrella, you are this, massive publisher, and you actually have first-party data. So how are you trying to, bring the insights and understanding audience behavior that you have to a marketer so they can actually have a better, understanding of their customer?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's a great build from the past two comments. Is there's great third-party tools to leverage to understand audiences holistically, right? If you want to understand Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal, there's third-party tools to use. We've recently started to harvest our own first-party data to help not just self-serve our own benefit to ourselves, which is to say, hey, if you want to reach ultra-high net worth individuals, we have first-party data sets that can do that across our publishers, but rather it's to build off of what you said, which is to say, how can we leverage this data to help our partners be more intelligent on who their consumers are, what type of content they prefer, what content they're consuming, as a means to fuel the planning process up front. Not just living in a world where we get a brief, right, that says, I want to reach this audience, how do you reach that audience, and then please optimize to get to the KPIs. It's starting one step ahead of that. So that way we're locking arms with creative teams, we're locking arms with planning teams to then make sure that we're driving the right outcomes throughout, which is how we see the world evolving.
And interesting that you talk about outcomes. Yesterday I was moderating a panel, and the CMO of Petco had a really great, tweetable moment where he's talking about both fingers and feet. And when you think about outcomes, you actually have to figure out how are you driving the business. And Rachel, one of I think the coolest things about MikMak is you really are empowering social commerce. And you really talk about how you've now fused, because there was brand, upper funnel stuff, DR, lower funnel stuff, but you really view it as, kind of fused together, brand performance marketing. So what are you doing? And, obviously, how are you helping your customers understand their audience?
Yeah, it goes all the way back to my time at Gap. I was flabbergasted that the CMO never wanted to see our direct response creative and paid a lot of attention to upper funnel creative.
Did you work in the performance part or the branding part?
I crossed. And the CMO was my boss and a dear friend of mine. And the conversation that I would constantly have with him is, listen, the customer is going to see our DR creative 37 times over. They're going to see your brand creative, if you're lucky, 2 to 5 times. So why don't you care about DR creative? And the dialogue was, because it's crap, and everyone tells me that my ideas won't perform. And it's a different creative muscle to produce content that actually converts. And for me, when I quit Gap to build MikMak, I knew that creative services had to be a part of my overall software offering, which is kind of unorthodox. Like, a lot of investors don't like to see that. But what software does is collapse the funnel. What creative does is actually encourage someone to buy. And to not have those two disciplines work together would be a complete miss, because I would be providing software to brands where they have no idea how to create performance-driven creative. So I have this other part to my business that's called MikMak Studios, and literally my entire creative team has been trained how to buy ads within environments like Facebook and Snap. If you talk to other people who work within creative, I'm going to say 90% of the time they've never even seen Facebook Ad Manager. If you've never seen Facebook Ad Manager and you get a beauty brief, for example, and the beauty brief asks you to produce creative that speaks to women who suffer from rosacea, that creative doesn't...
What's rosacea?
Rosacea is like redness in your cheeks. I suffer from it. And Dermablend's a great cover. Definitely a client. And anyway, long story short, that creative would not know that on Facebook you could never target someone for rosacea. So they wouldn't be empowered to go back to the brand and say, listen, I'm sure you did a ton of consumer research, and I'm sure that's a really important value proposition, but you literally cannot target that on Facebook. So I don't advise us to move down this path. And what's been amazing to me is the growth of the studios business, because I haven't been putting energy against growing that business, but marketers are demanding it. And we go in and we try to act really agnostic. At the end of the day, I say to them, I'll fully train your internal creative team. I'll fully train your agency of record. My goal is not to build this huge studios business because margins on content are pretty slim. And so I think that sort of unorthodox, really transparent approach has worked. And so it caused us to create this other part of the business, which is around training.
So what you're talking about is really the fusion of skills, and how could you actually have a better brief? How could you understand your audience? You really need to figure out how to collapse that funnel. I mean, when you were, thinking about your teams, you actually oversaw so much because and also you were the CMO of Gannett, but you were also running sales and marketing at Gannett. So when you think about your teams, like, does this resonate? I mean, did you have this challenge?
So the inherent problem is that everything's siloed, sort of like you were describing. And what you have is digital people who think, everybody thinks they know it all, right? And the problem is the digital people look at the brand people, and why those things are split up, we can argue, because I think that's already a problem, is they say, oh, those people worry about the pretty pictures, and we're the numbers people. And so, what startled me when I first got to Hyatt is you'd look at the direct response ads, and they were schlocky. And so then you would try and get the brand people to care, because the digital people, all they cared about was the numbers. They didn't actually care about the brand message and was it communicating what you wanted to. It was just a math exercise for them. And you really need those two pieces to come together, because you do have a message you're trying to relay and you're trying to get them to act. And this whole idea that they're the pretty picture people and they're the performance people is broken, because really those two things need to be together. But it's super hard to train people. And if I hear that the advertising business is broken one more time, it's been broken ever since I've been in it, and I'm 100 years old. The truth is, I still get agencies who come in and they pitch you with TV first. And when we were doing our RFP, I said, don't start with TV, because that's not really where most of our budgets are. And even though that's the case, even though you get them to flip it around and start with the social idea or start with digital ideas, when you actually end up hiring bigger agencies that have the capacity to do scale work for a global company, what happens is what they really want to focus on is the TV ad. So then you bring all your agencies together, you try to brief them all at the same time, and it's really hard to get people to step up to be the leader in that mix, because it's kind of easier to be a follower, right? Or you become the leader and then you're not worried about the digital piece. Yeah. So, I think the system is broken, just in a different way now.
Yeah, it's interesting just looking at the trajectory of all the darling direct-to-consumer brands that we all pay attention to, because the first hire they ever make on their marketing team is a performance marketer. And they'll reach to, we'll hit like a $50, $100 million business all through digital customer acquisition, and then they're going to plateau. Yep. And once they plateau, then they start turning to Comcast to do television ads. Yep. And so if you've ever come across like an Away Suitcase ad on TV or Rent the Runway, Dollar Shave Club, it's really interesting to see how they approach TV creative, because the discipline internally has always been performance marketing.
But what I find fascinating is we're talking about channels. And I think that fundamentally is the shift that we need to make as an industry, where we are no longer doing media planning and buying. We have to shift to audience planning and audience buying. And when you have an audience-first approach, you could actually be very objective now to figure out where is that audience. And that brings in the power of the publisher. You actually have that audience. And Matt, you talk a lot about kind of the linear approach to thinking about audiences, and like, why are we still buying things that are off the shelf? You have a whole kind of school of thought around things that are more bespoke audiences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason this is broken is because the way we define audience is from legacy media thinking. And I think what you're inherently doing when you train your creative teams to understand Facebook and Snap is you're building in a combination of creative and media. And in my opinion, it's broken and not integrated because the fundamental source of truth for those, the data, is different for media and it's different for creative. On the media side, we're super sophisticated. We have algorithms. We can take all this great data and we can find people who have a high propensity or likelihood to buy or do whatever we want them to do. But you don't ultimately change behavior or inspire people to do things differently by getting in front of them. You inspire them to change the behavior and do things differently by motivating them through something that's meaningful. So we have to change the way we do things. And while I appreciate the name of the panel, I think briefs are part of the problem. I think briefs are have become this sort of Band-Aid for crappy workflow, right? It's like, oh, let's do a brief. I'm going to give a brief, and then I'm going to pass it to the publisher. You've got a brief. I'm going to pass it to the social performance, and you've got a brief. But it needs to happen at the same time up front, where we're defining audiences based on how we're going to motivate them, the human truth, and how we're going to find them, the media targeting.
Well, and then that's got to resonate with you, Scott, right? Because when you think about your audience-first approach, you actually have all this audience behavior within kind of the News Corp umbrella, but people don't even know those different signals. And so, like, how are you trying to help brands figure that out?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's a lot. So I think the data ecosystem is extremely challenged right now, right? So we go into our DMP, you can drop down, you see 5,000 audience segments that you can buy, all with one sentence descriptions, right?
Oh, wait, I
Of
know the
exactly what's
solution.
in
It's
there.
artificial intelligence.
Oh wait,
It
right.
solves everything.
Right, exactly.
It'll automatically find what
we
we
got some
need.
great machine learning
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
all that stuff, right? So like at the end of the day,
You just can't say blockchain, okay?
just can't right.
No, we got
exactly.
buzzword bingo. You're not allowed to say blockchain.
We did that for we're two for three right now, right? We'll figure it out, man. How to get that one in there. But so if you look at it, it's insanity that a young buyer, let's just say, who doesn't have all the sophistication yet, goes in, picks that, hey, this in-market mover segment looks really great. Let's just try that, right? It's kind of like, I look at it like almost back in college, you had multiple choice tests, which are really easy. You kind of just guessed, like, yeah, that one looks pretty good. I'm just going to try it. Versus like you see the essay and you're like, shit, right? Like, I actually have to put some thought and strategy into this. And so to be able to understand and be able to get to the source of actual data, actually who these consumers are, understand their intent or whatever you might know, depending on the specific category. So in our world, we've got great mover data, we've great wealth data, we've great luxury data that we can identify.
And
That's
first-party.
true first-party data. It's not third-party. It's not it's not a guesstimate as to who these people are. We know for a fact who these folks are, and so that starts at the very core of the entire process. So whether that be in the planning, right, of identifying audiences, it impacts the creative that we're going to build, and then it impacts ultimately the results that we can generate. And so that's why we've built this new solution, News IQ, to help answer that, right?
And then, Mira, when you hear all of this, I mean, like, do you ever go in? Have you ever done that drop-down menu and think about 5,000 audiences? I mean, is that remotely interesting for you?
I mean, look, I go back to, I feel like I'm in a time warp. It's like the same conversation over and over again. And basically what I think you have is people who come with a different discipline, right? I mean, sort of the beauty of today is that you have all these new tools. And yet the proposition, the thing that you're trying to solve is the same thing. How do I engage someone in a meaningful way and get them to act if it's something that's of interest to them? So, I've always believed that different minds solving for the same thing will yield the same results. But the problem is, it's not just four of us getting together to solve the problem. We all have lots of people behind us, and you have to get them all to come together to try and solve the problem. We're in such a better place because you can, in fact, figure out, it's not a pot shot. You can figure out how to get the right message in front of the right person. That didn't used to exist, right? You used to have 3 channels, you had to put it out there and hope somebody was watching, and you really had no idea. So, I mean, of course that matters, but you also have to have a message that resonates, right? And all the data shows you that consumers want brands that mean something. So it's not just about click here and buy. You still have to actually do it's not sort of upper funnel, the consumer insight work to figure out what's meaningful to people. And I think the thing that's frustrating is figuring out how to get all this to work together in a way that's easy versus painful.
I think we need a new form of leadership. This is what I'm thinking based on what you just said. Totally true. So you've got all these subject matter expertise. Like everything's really complicated, right? Programmatic media is tough. Social on its own is tough. Like all these things are really tough. So you need functional expertise. I think we need a new breed of leaders that sit on top of that understand how all these things relate, that can then, I guess brief, as much as I hate that term, brief people who have functional expertise. So the integration, I think, needs to happen at the leadership level, on the brand side and on the agency
But part
side.
of the problem is muscle memory, right? So you have a lot of, and we have a generation gap. So you have CMOs, I mean, the number of CMOs who don't tweet themselves, right? I mean, there was a whole generation that had other people do it. If you don't actually do it yourself, you don't have that muscle memory. It's sort of like what you were explaining. So then when you go ask somebody to do it, it's pretty removed, right? So it does make a difference to take the time. I mean, listen, you're a global CMO, you can barely breathe. So, it is hard to make the time, but it's really important to actually, even if you're not going to ever be great at it. I mean, I'm not a great Instagrammer, but I try and do it myself just so that I can understand when they
You got some
speak to
selfie
me.
game. I've seen yourself.
Oh, good God. I know what I'm not good at. And I know that people are better. I know. Okay. So, I really think it makes a difference. And so a while back, I think when Twitter was first starting, you see how old I am, they actually had a session for a group of marketers where they got us all to go on and do hands-on training. It was one of the best. It's actually why I have my name as my Twitter handle. It was that early. But it was a really good lesson because just doing it teaches you something, right? And so I had the opportunity last week to actually interview Beth Comstock, and as you all know, she retired from her job. And one of the things that she was saying was that she wants to go out and be an intern. And so as listening to you, I was like, can I be an intern in your creative department? Because now I have the time to do that. Because it's about constantly learning, right? And so it's super difficult because everybody is just overwhelmed by their day job, much less their personal life, right? So how do you juggle all these things? What do I think as I sit here? It's like hard not to be overwhelmed, right?
I think people need more side gigs. Like
Yeah.
we have a program within Wonderman that helps people understand how to do their side gigs better. Like it teaches them how to do media, teaches them how to do creative, business planning, accounting, finance, the whole thing. Because, and the hypothesis behind it is the empathy thing. It's like once you do everything across all the disciplines, you just understand how they work better.
But companies also need to prioritize training. So just to plug one of my clients that I have nothing to do with this training, I'm literally blown away by how Procter & Gamble invests in their marketers. Yeah. They took several hundred marketers and put them through an 8-week training boot camp away from their day job so they could learn how to do performance marketing. Because if you grew up in the ranks of P&G, that was never something that you had to be taught. So to make that a must within your operating plan, that's why I have so much faith in the future of these companies, because they're investing in their people. But you don't see that across the board.
But that's where kind of the rubber meets the road ultimately. When they say, okay, we're going to truly understand the audience, we want the behavior, we have all this incredible robust persona. When it gets down to you, Scott, like all that richness, all that depth, all that kind of rigor is lost because we still are based on like these bullshit KPIs. And I feel like that is part of the how do you narrow that gap?
Yeah. How do you solve for bullshit KPIs? Man, that's got to be the toughest question of the whole freaking week, right?
I think there's a training course for that.
That's a whole training, right?
That's a whole nother panel, right?
Well,
Yeah,
so I yeah, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Good support. I think one way to look at it is, and the evolution that we've gone through on our side at News Corp is to better ask the questions up front to try to understand the core of the why. Try to ask why 3 times, right? This is what I'm trying to achieve. Why? Okay, why? Right? And you can do that to truly understand that the reason for in buying this media, in case here, is to whether it be bottom funnel demand generation, right? Against an audience that, frankly, maybe we don't have expertise in, right? It's saying, I can't help you right now, marketer, but you should go and go somewhere else for that, right? Et cetera. But to be smarter about what the capabilities are of our tools to train our organization, to be smarter about what tools we should match with the right KPIs. So we've rolled out leveraging all of our different assets, native, video, and display, coupling all of our data holistically, so we have optionality throughout the campaign execution process to fine-tune what results we're trying to drive, right? And to give flexibility to the marketer who might shift, right? What the objectives might be over the course of, or the measurement throughout the course of a specific campaign. So it's a tricky one. If we try our hardest to understand what the clients are trying to achieve, but I think it probably goes to the very top, right, as well, which is that if the CMO, and depending on the different silos that exist, is this money that's meant for e-commerce? Is it meant for offline? And is there clarity there? Sometimes there's not. So I think there needs to be alignment horizontally across that organization. Right?
But you brought up D2C brands, and I think what the issue with all these KPIs is somewhere along this journey we lose focus on the customer. Just to bring it back to your earlier point, because you're right, we're here to serve the customer. And when you think about these D2C brands, one of the benefits that they have is that they truly understand the customer journey end to end. Right? They actually have one CRM. It's not siloed in all these different departments. They actually are not producing a product per se. You know, you listen to Jen Rubio from Away, she's providing a customer experience, right? It's an experience ecosystem. And I remember you were at the AWNY last year, and you even spoke about, you know what do we do in a world where you can't show an impression? And you were talking about, you know, kind of apps as like all these different, you know, consumer touch points.
It's hard to compare. I mean, I hate to use this word legacy businesses versus, there's totally different things. I mean, when you're at a business that started in a different way, you're like band-aiding backwards, right? If you start off as a way, you're building something clean, right? Like I mean, half the data systems didn't speak to each other. Like, so, I mean, it's amazing that a lot of companies, they have data. Well, not really. I mean, they have the data, but not in a usable form. So the investment to get all that cleaned up is not insignificant. And, you know, when you're on an executive team making decisions about the business, like, are you gonna, I remember we were having trade-off conversations. Are we gonna fix the web? I mean, is it gonna be the mobile device? Are we gonna clean up the data? I mean, these are all choices. It's not an endless pool. And it was like, oh, by the time we fix the web, I mean, nobody's going to be on the web. I mean, you know, like that's how fast things move. And I think that, you know, it's a hard game, right? Because, you know, Away has they don't have those issues. You know, I remember when the Daily Beast bought Newsweek, and everybody was like, oh, this is going to be so great. It was like, oh, yeah, that's great, unless you understood that in that acquisition, they inherited all the union issues that came with Newsweek that actually didn't impact Daily Beast. Daily Beast didn't have those issues. It was a terrible decision, actually, if you knew about that, because then all of a sudden they were encumbered in a way that a digital-first business hadn't been encumbered before, right? So marketing is not isolated. There's a bigger business piece that it all works into. And data wasn't just a marketing issue. Data is like the underlying operational piece of businesses, right?
It crosses
everything.
But you're hitting on a very important point. This is something that, you know, another dear friend of ours, Antonio Lucio, who's now just left HP to be the CMO of Facebook, you know, he talks about how, you know, today's CMO is really the chief growth officer, but in reality, they're a general manager. And a true CMO has to understand all the different levers of the business. And I was curious if maybe you could just share a little bit, because I think it was at Gannett, they actually, you know, gave you responsibility after you got there as CMO. They gave you also responsibility of sales. And I thought that was very unique. And so
it was unique.
What was that experience like that you got to see it all sales and marketing?
So it was rare for a marketer to get sales, right? You've seen the inverse, but not that. And by the way, let me just say, so, you know, Gannett at the time, 26% of our revenue came from digital because we owned Career Builder and Cars.com, but, you know, all the rest of it came from print. So, you know, when the CMO asked me 3 times to take on sales, which was a declining number, I didn't like run at it. Because, you know,
I think Scott can empathize.
You should come to a board meeting with me when you're reporting declining numbers. It's really fun. But it was interesting. It was interesting to try and, you know, and I had worked with sales teams for a long time in my career, but it was interesting to try and, you know, have that mindset when you went at that discussion. But in the end, I mean, I would say to you, a good CMO always was a good general manager. I mean, it was never just about doing ads, right? You had to understand that you were actually in business and whatever you were doing was in service of the business.
Yeah, you're not the chief advertising officer, you're the chief marketing officer.
I mean, in the end, you're doing it to help drive business, right? So if you have that mindset, you're not just thinking about, am I going to make pretty pictures or, you know, drive the bottom of the funnel? So I don't think that was all that different. But it's a complicated beast. And again, you know, Gannett at the time, and now it's a totally different company, but it was a legacy business. So you had a lot of things that you were dealing with. And frankly, you had, I mean, digital was doing well, but, you know, it's sort of like the Jeff Zucker dimes to dollars equation. It just wasn't making up the money that you were actually losing on the digital side, right? A print ad was $100,000. You had to sell a lot of digital units to make that up. And you had salespeople who were out there, and you thought to yourself, well, if I just do programmatic, I don't even need these salespeople. Like, it just was a super complicated thing to have to constantly parse through. But I highly recommend it, even though it was really painful to do, because it gives you just a different view in. And it was interesting how resistant the salespeople were to work for marketers, just I suppose as marketers would be to work for salespeople. So it's always interesting to see the culture clash. But it goes back to the land of silos, which we all seem to be stuck in.
You know, one thing to add and to build on this, it goes back to experience. I've had eBay and PayPal working in e-commerce for us 7 years. The one benefit to potentially that you just, the scenario that you were just in, is that if the marketers or the product team is part of that kind of sales organization where the organization's actually eating its own dog food, right?
I like drinking
That can
their own
be really
champagne,
powerful.
but sure.
Drinking their own champagne, man. That's why you're a CMO. And maybe I'm the sales guy. There you go, brother. There you go, right?
You can flip.
We can flip that, right? If you think about that, and this is exactly what we do with eBay PayPal, which is that all the data, all the products that we built were built for demand generation purposes first, and then as they worked, they were then layered on to the marketers, right? So then here's an alternate way to monetize the same data sets. And I think as we think about all the data inside News Corp, we're taking a similar methodology. It's not as clean because we still have different silos within business units, but I think the core that what's important is that as we're setting up our organization, we're not setting it up as a means to say this is what's going to be great for just driving ad revenue the way that it used to be, which is let's just try to go get as much money as we possibly can, regardless of what maybe the KPIs are. It's saying, how can we build products that are really going to make a difference? And if you're not doing that today, then your business is going to be in trouble long term.
So, the common thread here is all coming back to data, specifically first-party data. And, I'd love, maybe, a combination of, Matt and Rachel, if you could talk a little bit from your vantage point, because I think everyone has heard about, GDPR and, it's something where we're now living this post-GDPR era, and I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for both brand marketers as well as brand publishers to take back control of their customer. But the kind of maybe unexpected effect of this legislation is that the walled gardens have actually put the walls higher, right? And so we are now going to an era where I think first-party data is going to be even at more of a premium, and it's going to be even harder to get. And I know, Rachel, you're working with a lot of brands where they're coming to you because you can actually help them with that. And then you actually, from Wonderman's perspective, you actually have first-party data. So I'm curious, how is that actually helping you inform, the marketer in terms of understanding their customer more? And what would be your rec on a first-party data strategy in post-GDPR?
Yeah. The way that we talk about it is we call it power of the pixel. So it blows my mind, the majority of clients that come our way where, A, they don't have pixels properly installed even on their checkout page, which is the most valuable place to capture that data, let alone in the rest of the distributed ecosystem. So yes, as GDPR becomes more pervasive, it's going to be harder than ever before to acquire customer data. So today is the cheapest day for you to begin to own that customer relationship. The other working headwind is that, just at least I will speak from the e-com world, the majority of e-com sales today actually come from third-party retailers and marketplaces. So D2C for most of the Fortune 1000s is like 10%, maybe upwards of 20% of your apparel and footwear. And so getting close to the customer and trying to collect that.
You're talking about the Walmarts, the Targets of the world.
Yeah, they own the majority of first-party data. And it's funny, when I was at Cannes this summer, I kept saying, next year, it's not going to be Facebook Beach, it's going to be Target Beach. And if you've been walking around here today, and I don't know if anyone from Target's here, Target is everywhere. So the next great players in advertising are 100% Amazon, Target, Walmart, and eBay, et cetera. And obviously you come from that organization. So for us, what we do is we create experiences for these brands that are really reliant on third-party retailers to capture as much of that customer data as they can, while the retailer still captures the end sale. So it's sort of a win-win. And the world that we play in, it's funny, when I started my career, I did teach Pepsi executives how to use Twitter. I was Pepsi on Twitter. That was my first job. And it was the unsexy part of the organization. It was shopper marketing. And today, my business is shopper marketing. And I think that's the most interesting part of marketing today because it's where the greatest amount of first-party data lives. So for brands, it's getting your ducks in order to figure out what is your D2C strategy, and you might not have a role to play in that. Like, if you sell highly commoditized items, it might be an unrealistic expectation that you could have a D2C business around that. And then figuring out creative ways to capture as much of that first-party data, and if you're doing it through digital, it's about the pixel. Like the pixel is what allows you to capture all this information.
But isn't it also about having the relationship with the customer? I think that's, I mean, like, make no doubt about it. Like, there will be some version of GDPR here in the U.S. Like, winter is coming.
Yep.
And, it's already starting in California. We already see some of that legislation. Plug, we actually have the Quantcast Chief Privacy Officer on Thursday with the head of engineering for BuzzFeed talking about GDPR, post-GDPR world. But the reality is you need to have a relationship with your customer. And if you actually are providing a value exchange, then you know what? Someone is going to be willing to give that information to you. And so how are you helping folks think about that?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I think it's important for us to make the distinction that somebody else's first-party data is your third-party data. So, like, I don't think it matters. Like, I think it's cool that you got
that was deep, man.
Yeah, I know.
You have to say it again.
You write that down?
That's a tweetable
Okay,
moment.
yeah, okay, there you go.
I feel like I'm in an episode of The Office. Let's just talk in acronyms.
We try not to get together very often. It's a bad situation. It's your first-party data, my first-party data. It's brands' third-party data. GDPR is going to mess that whole system up. Brands have to start creating their data collection strategy now, and I think you got to do it like we always counsel: collect in a very overt way. Like if you look at the companies that have really smart data collection strategies, that's core to their business.
Who's like best in class? Do you think?
I mean, all the people that everyone would use, like the digital first companies that they have a value exchange, right? So there's a reason that I put my data into a digital product and service because I'm getting something out of it that's valuable. So I'm happy to give you that data. Like I mean, we run research and we know all this stuff from both secondary and primary research. People are actually totally fine giving data. It's not like this blanket statement that people don't want to give you their data. They just want to know what you're going to do with it, and they want a reason to give it to you. Like I'm totally fine giving my data to individuals.
There was an article, I think this week, about a coffee shop, I think it's near Stanford, where professors and other people pay, but students, if you're willing to give your data, can eat for free. I thought that was super interesting, right? Because it's an overt play.
I agree, although I think it's a weak value prop. Like I think it's
okay,
cool
but
that it's overt, but it should be something that's like, we'll be able to tell you when we've got a new coffee drink ready for you. Like Starbucks is a great example,
Sure.
right? Happy to give them my data because this is just incredibly phenomenal to be able to walk into Starbucks, grab my coffee and walk out. Happy to give you that data.
But free breakfast, that might be a good value exchange for a
If
student.
you're a college student, it might be a good proposition.
No, that's fair. It's just kind of like, promos are easy, but fair. Maybe it's just.
It's just interesting to see people play with different things. I mean, I think that's what's interesting. When I first joined Hyatt, they were, it was amazing how little they knew actually about their customers. They didn't even know if they were male or female.
But how is that possible?
It's possible because you checked in. Because you booked the reservation. And by the way, so the natural place you would think as somebody coming from the outside to get data is at check-in, right? Because that's when you're interacting with somebody. But the happiness of the customer is basically on how quickly they can check you in. And it used to take like a million strokes of the key, because if you remember, you're interacting with the person and they're looking down, right? But you want the customer service experience to be a human one where they're interacting with you. So they had to collapse all these systems so that it wasn't requiring that person behind the desk to spend all their time looking down to do like a million different things.
But mobile check-in.
Right, okay. So we can get to that too, because it's amazing how complicated everything is. But anyway, so they basically it was like, why don't we just give away free Wi-Fi, and the price for free Wi-Fi in essence will be giving us some basic data. And most people, I would say, at that moment where they check in and they desperately need to get on Wi-Fi, are willing to give you a lot of information, right? It was a huge battle, actually, operationally, to make that happen. Like, it just seemed like such an obvious idea. It required several meetings of my getting different people together to just be like, we're going to problem solve this. Like, what are the legal issues? What is this? I mean, it sounds easy.
Yeah.
It's actually really complicated to do. And now, if you, that's pretty rote to do. But I mean, that was like 4 years ago. It seems like dog years.
I do think it's also kind of the wrong question. I think everyone should have their data collection strategy. I think it's fantastic. Data in tech is no longer the limiting factor like it used to be. There's a crap load of data. Like there just is. There's so much data out there, and the tech has gotten really sophisticated. It's people and process. We don't do this stuff with intent. You've got all the major tech providers out there selling CMOs on their technology, which could theoretically work really well. Nobody knows how to operate it or even implement it, much less configure it and operate it. We need different people, and we need different workflows to make all this stuff work. And I think we're all still running to data and tech, and we got to figure we got to figure the workflow stuff out first.
Well, and maybe this is a great way to kind of like start to wrap up the panel. This is actually leading to what I think is the most important thing. It's about understanding human behavior. It's about understanding customer behavior, and that all leads to insights. And so we're all drowning in data, and what we aren't really even thinking about or talking about. On the panel yesterday, we had the CMO of T-Mobile, Nick Drake. And he's like, blew everyone in the room away because the amount of data that is now going to be coming in from 5G is going to be overwhelming. If people think they're drowning data today, and again, it's not maybe the right data, but you're still going to be overwhelmed with so much information. This is where kind of machine learning has to come in. It becomes about understanding the patterns in the data, about understanding patterns in behavior. And again, that's one of the key things that part of the reason why you're kind of collapsing everything to show a one audience approach from a News Corp perspective is you're saying we understand the patterns in behavior.
Yeah, I think, and I think these two go hand in hand. The last conversation and this one too. So, if we're all solving for our own first-party data, the hope, right, is that 80% of our revenue is going to be driven by 20% of our customers, right? So that very best customer base that we have is going to drive the bulk of our success. Now we got to figure out how to solve for that 20%, and the data sets that most companies have, right? They're going to be, so as an example, when I was at PayPal, right? I knew your transaction history of what you bought at PayPal, right? And that was incredibly valuable, right? However, in order to make that actionable, right, or to make it even more actionable, you'd want to layer other data sets to be able to truly understand both, how to build audiences, but then also too, how to better understand who those folks are. So I think as we're looking at it, the benefit that News Corp has, not to pat ourselves on the back on it, but we have a large number of data sets that we're pulling together holistically. So an ultra high net worth individual, right, that we've identified, when he's or she is looking for a home, on Realtor, we can identify that to say that, okay, this ultra high net worth who's in market, person who's might be middle income, we might see is buying CPG products through News America marketing, and then we can leverage that. But it's not. It's about having some horizontal strength to be able to pair a data set with others that you can rely on to better understand and have a holistic picture of who these consumers are, because one data set in itself isn't enough. That's right. Right? And so that's where we've gone so far. We've done second party data relationships with MasterCard. Right, so now we can take the data sets that we have from our sites, we can pair that with transaction history with MasterCard to build even broader and more precise audiences. We're talking with other partners in the same way, not to go into the drop-down menu of a gazillion different audiences that you can plug in very easily. It's about saying what data can you rely on that's going to be deterministic, that's going to tell you exactly something interesting about this audience that then we can leverage for our own purposes, and we can help marketers leverage as well.
Awesome. Well, with 5 minutes left, I would love to just kind of wrap up on what are you most excited about? As we kind of think about tail end of 18 and as we go into like 2019, and maybe we could start with Rachel and work our way down and end with Miriam. So when you think about all the things that are out there, what would be the thing that you're most excited about? Something positive.
Something positive?
Well, it doesn't have to be positive. You'd be excited.
I'll say two things.
Okay.
Positive is that I have so much faith in the future of America because of everyone in high school. Like we started doing internships with high school kids because we have the luxury of being in New York City, and it blows me away how much they know compared to like what I felt I knew when I was there. So I have a lot of faith in that generation. The thing I said before, I just really strongly believe that I'm going to be right in this belief that the next greatest players in advertising are Amazon, Target, and Walmart.
Well, arguably, Amazon's already part of that mix. Everyone's talking about them, but I think the Walmart and the Targets of the world, that's going to kind of.
But Amazon's still only 4%, like compared to overall
Offline
Google
retailers,
Yeah.
Awesome, Matt.
I think I'm most excited about the. I see this, maybe just kind of looking for it, but I see this slightly increasing trend of people who are thinking about themselves with a slash, like they do multiple things. So they're like, I'm an X with a Y. And I think ultimately that's where, as a culture, we've got to get to. And I think
what would you be?
There. I don't know. Comic book artist / advertising executive. Peanutgallery.com.
Peanutgallery.com.
Peanutgallerycomics.com.
What a plug. Scott.
Yeah, sure. So it's right now. So I've joined this organization a little more than a year ago. I'm really the reason I joined it was because I think there's a dichotomy. There's performance-based marketing that's leveraging very specific, let's just call it really cheap inventory that's out there, and then on the other side you've got very premium, let's just call it expensive or high value inventory. What I'm excited about is blending these worlds together, and that might sound like it's self-serving, but it's at the very core of why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is that how do you help leverage data to truly connect with consumers versus just bombarding them with technology for the sake of doing that. It's at the core of how we think about every single day we come to work. So I'm excited to continue to prove that out.
Are you gonna let him get away with that? Okay, keep going.
I can yield my time to him.
It's what I do, brother. It's what I do, man.
We won't pick up him, with 2 minutes left. But Miriam.
Oh, what am I excited about? That's actually a hard question. I don't know. I'm sort of flummoxed. I'm flummoxed about what's going on in the world around us. The thing that's still exciting to me that's not new is the app, the Starbucks app, right? Because that idea of like making something easier for somebody, I mean, it's an example I love because it gets rid of a pain point. I'm excited about those moments, somebody finding out a moment to make something easier for somebody. And that's really the best one. Sadly, it's not that recent, right? I'm also excited to see Nike take an incredible stand, right? Like the things I'm excited about is the consumers want brands to stand for something and that there are marketers who are willing to actually lean into that despite the risks. In an environment where that's really rare and difficult to do. For me, it's sort of those bigger things. Because now that I'm not working, now that I get to be with students, I don't have to think about things like all the acronyms.
And tell a little bit about like where you're going to be, like what you're doing at Columbia. Like,
Oh, well, I'm trying to figure that out myself. I always leap and then figure out what I'm doing, but I've agreed to be an executive in residence up at Columbia University for their strategic communications program. Because I want to learn. I want to go back and learn because I feel like, sadly, the more senior you get, the further removed you are from the day-to-day.
Well, it's the kind of thing where when you think of all this, it really comes back to how you started it, that if you truly put the customer at the center, and if you actually get all the stakeholders talking and trying to figure out how do you solve the problem together, I'm a big believer that a problem shared is a problem solved. But thank you all for being a part of the panel. Really appreciate it. Round of applause for the panelists. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
And of course, now we need a post-panel selfie.
The post-panel.
Things have changed.
I'm surprised we didn't do a mid-panel
At our
selfie.
theatre, we have another session starting shortly.
Wait, what's that?
It's a shadow.